We're going to move on now to the next item, which is a debate on motion 20027 in the name of Richard Lochhead on Scotland as a Science Nation. And I would encourage members who wish to contribute in this debate or to this debate to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary, Richard Lochhead, to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to present this motion to the Parliament, Scotland as a Science Nation. Since starting in my ministerial role, I have been consistently impressed by all the incredible work carried out across all of our Scottish institutions with the UK and international partners and in growing and developing science and research in this country, Scotland. From the Enlightenment through to the range of industrial revolutions, and we're in the fourth industrial revolution now, the people of Scotland have shaped the modern world through science, invention and innovation. And those pioneers continue to echo through the ages and inspire new generations. We just have to look at the events being organised this year to commemorate, for instance, James Watt's bicentenary, or the fact that Mary Somerville, known as the Queen of 19th century science, is the first female scientist to be featured on a British banknote, which of course followed a public vote on the issue. The new knowledge created in Scotland is not only improving the lives of the people of Scotland on a daily basis, but is placing our country at the forefront of addressing many of the challenges of global importance. Now, of course, we do live in very interesting times, and indeed that would be an understatement. Never before have we been bombarded, for instance, on a daily basis by half-truths or even naked lies in the news and the media. And in such confusing times, it's perhaps more important than ever that we all come together to recognise the key role that Scottish science and research can play in uncovering and promoting new facts, and I emphasise the word facts, and knowledge. And at the same time, as we do that, we can't forget the importance of ethics in all of that as well, because there is a key role for us as politicians, as MSPs, as parliamentarians, and all those in a public role to ensure we do respect the facts. And we know that science and research in this country would not be excellent if it wasn't for the fact that it is ethical at the same time. That idea very much fits in with the Scottish Government's own commitment to protect and respect and realise internationally recognised human rights and to promote democracy, the rule of law and human rights across the whole of the world. Research ethics not only promote the expansion of knowledge that they support, but also they support values at the same time, such as fairness and mutual respect, key components for collaboration as well at the same time. Scotland's science and research has intrinsic value as both a cultural good and also a symbol of human achievement. And thus we must continue to listen to and respect the experts who are enabling us to use science and research outputs to the benefit of society. And we should bear that in mind, of course, when some politicians in the past have said we should just ignore the experts or not give them the respect they deserve. But there are benefits from research and science in this country. There are many, many different benefits, and of course that does include economic benefits. Scottish universities, for instance, continue to perform well with spin-off activity. The number of active university spin-offs in Scotland has grown by 46% between 2014 and 2017, to give the latest figures, for instance. And it so happens this morning, I was speaking to Professor Peter Matheson, the Principal of Edinburgh University, who was telling me that in the last 12 months alone, that university has created 65 new companies just in 1 year. And their track record also illustrates that after 15 years, 80% of their spin-offs still exist today. It's not just the universities, our research institutes are impacting positively, particularly on the rural economy as well. And a previous analysis estimated that the wider economic benefits of their research contributed a total of £151.8 million GVA to the Scottish economy in 2016 alone, and supported nearly 1,500 jobs. As many members will know, I have spoken often in this chamber, as have others, about Scotland's culture of science, discovery and invention. And it really is worth remembering that Scotland continues to be a global leader in science and research. And of course, I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight a few of our successes, because this year's report, published by the Scottish Scientific Advisory Council on the science landscape in Scotland, underlines the truly global reach and quality of Scottish research at our universities, in our research institutes, our businesses as well, and within the public sector. That report provides clear evidence of just how much we punch above our weight. Scotland is number one in the UK in terms of the number of publications per researcher. We're also number one in the UK in terms of citations per researcher, and number one for this measure compared to the EU and other countries studied. That is our current strength as a science nation, and it's something we should shout to the rooftops about and tell the world about. But we all know at the same time, if we are able to secure this position into the future, that we can't be complacent. We have to work hard to ensure that Scotland continues to provide people with the right skills and remains a great place to study and work in science and research. It's worth noting we continue to make good progress with delivering our 5-year STEM strategy as part of that agenda, which is our key policy in supporting STEM education and training in this country. And actions there include trialling the Scottish Young STEM and Leader Mentoring Programme, grant funding STEM professional learning projects. We've got colleges developing regional STEM hubs to strengthen collaboration between partners, including universities, science centres and employers. And we have our science and society funding, making science events and activities accessible to around 1 million people in Scotland at our science centres and our science festivals. All of this activity is focused on ensuring we maintain and strengthen our talent pipeline in science, from supporting learning and teaching at all stages to inspiring people of all ages through public science initiatives. And of course, we know that the Education Committee has just published its report on STEM, and we look forward to hopefully debating that at some point in this Parliament in the future as well. But we can be truly proud of the contribution that Scottish-based researchers are making on the European stage and in the wider world. The SSAC report I mentioned earlier and previously quoted also underlined the fact that international collaboration is integral to our continued excellence in science and research. Remaining a key leader and partner in international collaborations will continue to be a major part of our drive to promote Scotland as a world-leading science and research nation. And whilst I'm not going to go off at a tangent and speak about Brexit in any great detail in this debate, it is important in terms of the debate over collaboration with other European countries in particular, that whatever happens, if Brexit were to go ahead, for instance, which hopefully it won't, then we have to absolutely maintain that strength of Scottish science and research, which is collaboration with our European partners. Yeah.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for giving way. Does he recognise that if we leave the EU with a deal and have a constructive relationship with our European partners moving forward, that would be the best outcome from Brexit?
Cabinet Secretary, Minister.
Well, given from all my conversations with many leading researchers and their representatives in Scotland, the best deal for science and research in Scotland is to have no Brexit and to remain within the European Union. And if we are to leave, then we of course need a much better deal than what's on the table at the moment if we are to continue the full benefits of Horizon 2020, Erasmus and the European collaboration that takes place in the science and research field as well. In support of that particular agenda in terms of collaboration, I recently convened Scotland's first ever Science and Research Summit in June. That brought together the wider science sector, including universities, colleges, research institutes, science engagement in government science, and the summit focused on key issues around collaborating for excellence. And since then, I've invited our Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Sheila Rowan, the renowned Sheila Rowan, to chair a working group to develop the ideas that will help us to achieve our Scotland Science Nation ambitions. So I very much look forward to seeing the recommendations from that working group. Because I do want more people here in Scotland to take pride in the fact that science and research excellence is not just part of our history, it's also part of our present and our future success too. Science is very much an intrinsic part of our culture and our daily lives. It reflects that Scotland is an outward-looking, open and progressive nation. And as our campaign says, Scotland is now. So we should celebrate all of that. And we need to get that message out to the international audiences out there to encourage people of all countries to visit, study, work and invest in Scotland. So my vision is for Scotland to be recognised across the globe as a science and research nation. I strongly believe that many, if not all, in this chamber will agree that Scotland has a clear and proven track record of science and research. It's not just about celebrating those figures of the Scottish Enlightenment, although we should continue to do that and do it more, and in previous industrial revolutions who did so much to invent the modern world, though of course, again, we should do that with them as well. It's about recognising today's world leaders in research and science in Scotland and recognising Scotland's pioneering role in the fourth industrial revolution. And it's about recognising that the Scottish Government's progressive forward-looking policies, together with Scotland's research excellence, are an ideal combination to support the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and help to make the world a better place. It's about inspiring people from around the world about the fantastic careers open to them in science and research here in Scotland as well. And about saying that there's something special about Scotland that makes it one of the best places in the world for science, invention, innovation and research. So our research excellence is as Scottish as our landscapes, our tartan and our whisky. Now, Scotland has proven research excellence across a breadth of disciplines. This allows us to capitalise flexibly on emerging opportunities and to respond positively to a wide range of national and global challenges. And to give you a small flavour of those strengths spanning physical, biological and clinical sciences, I can say, for instance, we have a strong footprint in the physical sciences across artificial intelligence, which was debated by this chamber just a week or two ago, data, engineering, robotics, photonics, sensors, including applications in energy and transport. Also in biological and clinical sciences, we have expertise on molecular biology, drug discovery, infectious diseases, genetics, animal and plant sciences, Alzheimer's, precision medicine, and many other areas as well. And another Scottish strength, a key strength, is in the environmental sciences, including agriculture, food security, and blue biotech as well. And just last week, we should also say that in the context of all of that, the University of Strathclyde received the Queen's Anniversary Prize for Higher and Further Education, one of the highest accolades in UK higher education. And that specific award recognised Scotland's research and energy innovation, and I'm sure we all want to say well done to all of those involved in what was a fantastic achievement. Indeed, a total of 22 prizes were announced this month from the 13th round of the Queen's Anniversary Prizes, 3 of which came from Scottish institutions, Strathclyde, Stirling and Heriot-Watt. So again, these prizes are more examples of Scotland's excellence in science and research. But again, we can't stand still. To maintain our excellence in science and research, we must support and nurture the next generation of researchers and knowledge exchange practitioners. And we need to ensure our excellence in academia supports our excellence in business and in public services. We're doing that through our continued investments, for instance, in the Innovation Centre programme. Through transformational collaboration between these businesses and universities and colleges and institutes and the public sector and others, the Innovation Centres aim to enhance innovation and entrepreneurship across key economic sectors to create more jobs and grow our economy. So through the Scottish Funding Council and enterprise agencies, we do continue to invest in these innovation centres in Scotland of up to £75 million over the next 5 years. The recent announcement of funding for the Scottish Aquaculture Innovation Centre to the tune of £10 million is just one example of how we're helping to grow innovation between business and research. I have to say I've seen some of the groundbreaking innovation firsthand, and it's absolutely fascinating. One project I recently observed during my visit to the Digital Health and Care Institute in September was the ScotCap project, which is the Scottish Capsule Programme. And that leading innovation uses camera pill technology with the service that comes with that to aid clinicians working in gastroenterology services. So that innovative technology means that patients receive a less invasive form of endoscopy in local community hubs and in their own homes, minimising the impact on their daily lives. So effectively, it is a pill with a camera inside it that you take, and it videos your insides, which is much less invasive. So that's the amazing things that are happening with technology and innovation in Scotland at the moment. So when members hear me talk about my ambition for Scotland to stand out as a science and research nation, it is innovative projects such as that ScotCap project that are supporting a revolution in health services in Scotland and beyond. It's not just in health that such innovations have the potential for transforming lives. An amazing partnership between the Scottish company Sunamp Limited and the School of Chemistry at the University of Edinburgh has successfully developed heat battery technology, for instance, that can store energy from any source as heat and release it on demand to provide space heating and hot water. So that reduces fossil fuel energy sources, for instance, and also carbon emissions at the same time, as well as saving households a lot of money, with proven savings of up to 75% on utility bills. So there's a lot of amazing, exciting things happening there in Scotland. Finally, looking ahead, we do have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to promote science in this country in connection with the United Nations COP26 summit that's going to be held in Glasgow a year or so from now. This annual global forum on climate change will attract hundreds of world leaders and thousands of delegates and other visitors from around the world. It will give us an amazing, unprecedented opportunity to showcase the best of Scottish science and research and the developments that are taking place here in Scotland through collaboration between industry and academia to help tackle climate change. So we will absolutely use that platform as well. So, Presiding Officer, Scotland excels in science and research and we should be celebrated as a science nation. Researchers in Scotland are at the forefront of multidisciplinary international research collaboration, tackling national and global challenges and driving forward the frontiers of knowledge. So I hope members can rally today to promote Scotland as one of the world's leading science nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Oliver Mundell to open for the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a pleasure to open this afternoon's debate on behalf of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party and to join with others from across the Chamber and beyond in celebrating Scotland's role as a science nation. I think from the speech we've heard from the Government today, there's not a great deal to disagree with, and it is a topic we can all gather together and support. As the Government motion rightly states, we can be very proud of the deserved global reputation we have in this field, from our tremendous universities and research institutions leading the way in life sciences, biotech and informatics, as well as just about everything else, to the world-leading companies and industries who are based here and call Scotland their home. From the North Sea to renewables, from drug and medicine manufacturers to the aerospace industry, there can be no doubt we have a lot to celebrate in the here and now. These achievements, of course, find their foundation in our proud history of scientific endeavour. Indeed, for centuries, Scotland has been a beacon for enlightened scientific thought, home to Alexander Graham Bell, Mary Somerville, Alexander Fleming, James Watt, amongst many others, names that will probably pop up many times in this debate. In addition, many of the most important scientific advances have their roots in Scottish research, such as the MRI scanner, the development of keyhole surgery, and the theory around the existence of the Higgs boson particle. While I don't want to dwell overly on the historical, I do think there is a lesson for us all in this that we can take from the strength of what's been achieved already and what we enjoy today, and that is that we must continue to invest in and value science and recognise its importance to our cultural identity, to the economy and in job creation, because it is not possible to have future success without continuing to do so and seeing it as a development over time. By ensuring we take the right steps now and by listening to the conclusions that come from the Science and Research Working Group led by the Chief Scientific Advisor for Scotland, then we can ensure that the success of future generations find their legacy in the achievements and work of today. And I did hear the Cabinet Secretary talk of the importance of listening to experts, and my plea would be for all parties and all governments to reflect carefully and gently on his advice, because I think sometimes the Scottish Government can be as guilty as governments elsewhere in the United Kingdom of cherry-picking what experts they want to listen to and when. And I think if we're going to genuinely put experts at the forefront of our science policy, then we've got to be willing to listen to them even when they have uncomfortable truths to share with us. And for me, this centres on education and the need to properly promote science in our schools, particularly in early years and in primary schools. I've seen great work, and there's no denying that there is great work in many of our schools. I've visited schools in my own constituency who are doing phenomenal things and giving our young people great opportunities, but it's certainly not consistent across the country. One of the many inspiring contributions in this area for me is come from seeing figures like Sir James Hough, who, despite his position as an international leader in the search for gravitational waves and his own academic commitments, has taken a great deal of time and interest in encouraging primary school teachers to embrace science in the classroom. I was delighted to join other members of the Education Committee, of which I was a member at the time, at this year's Primary Science Education Conference. And I was impressed, not just by Sir James, but by many of the other speakers and exhibitors and classroom practitioners and teachers who were there, and young people themselves, who appeared to grasp the importance of engaging people early and recognising that science doesn't need to be complicated or particularly elaborate in order to be interesting and useful. And I think there's a lot of work we can do to ensure that our schools are well equipped to deliver meaningful science, to teach those principles and values that we've heard about already in this debate to the next generation. And I am intending to remain positive in what is a predominantly positive debate. However, I do feel it would be remiss of me, again, not to take the opportunity to highlight some of the challenges to the Scottish Government. Firstly, the importance of subject choice as we move into secondary school. Here, both the research and anecdotal evidence, as well as the opinion of many experts, suggest that at least in some schools, science subjects are feeling the squeeze, particularly when it comes to qualifications. There is also, as the government itself acknowledges, challenges in recruiting and retaining teachers in STEM subjects, particularly in rural and remote communities like my own Dumfriesshire constituency. More recently, concerns have also been raised about multi-level teaching, where 2 or more distinct courses are taught simultaneously in one classroom. And here, the Learned Society group on STEM education have said that science teachers themselves have expressed concern that multi-course teaching doesn't allow them to fully support the needs or aspirations of pupils. This, I think, should worry us all. These are issues that are well documented and have been the subject of considerable recent and ongoing parliamentary interest. So I will just say that if we're unable to get to the bottom of these systemic issues within our education system, then the sector and our country as a whole will suffer and fail to maximise its potential. It's also difficult to see how we will meet the Scottish Government's key performance indicator to reduce the proportion of STEM employers in Scotland who are experiencing skill shortages if we fail to meet the gap in the education system. As well as what's happening in our schools, what happens in our universities, colleges and research institutions also remains important. Again, there is much in this debate to be proud of, with 5 Scottish universities in the 2016-17 top 200 times higher education world rankings. Indeed, our academic and research institutions punch well above their weight, with figures showing that 77% of university research in Scotland is deemed to be world-leading or internationally excellent. I think that's something we can be very proud of. The university research here in Scotland also has a greater impact on our economy than it does elsewhere in the UK, looking at the equivalent figures. Again, that just shows how key what's developed at our universities is, and it's all about how we capitalise on that and help commercialise some of that research, because I think that is key in an unpredictable world to helping make sure that those institutions are sustainable in the future. There are too many outstanding projects, individuals and collaborations to list them all individually in today's debate, but I'm sure many members will pull out their own examples. But for me, as the Member of Scottish Parliament for Dumfriesshire, I don't feel I could speak in this debate without highlighting the ongoing work of the SRUC in my constituency at their Dairy Research Centre, which is due to be significantly enhanced as part of the Borderlands growth deal. And these are going to seek to build on one of the longest running longitudinal experiments in the world by taking the learning from the Langhill herd and applying that to research. They've already established significant partnerships around the world, including with Malawi, and I do think it is very special that research around dairy cows in Dumfriesshire is benefiting farmers in a nation that has such close links to Scotland and to this Parliament. And I think for me, very much like the work done at the Morden Institute, and the Roslin Institute. These types of research continue to make a significant contribution to rural Scotland and to our rural economy, and show the real value and practical advantage of retaining and developing world-leading expertise here in Scotland. It also shows the breadth of our research expertise. Many people, I think, when they hear science, just think about traditional sort of chemistry, biology and physics, but there's a great deal of work being done in industry that has a significant commercial potential and changes people's day-to-day lives. And that takes me on to the final piece of the puzzle, industry itself, an area that my colleagues will expand upon in their contributions this afternoon. But for my part, can I say again how very fortunate we are to have many world-leading and enterprising research-based companies here in Scotland. It's a real positive that they want to be based here, and there's no doubt to me that they recognise the strength of our science education, and that is a vital draw for them. And the opportunity to work in partnership with our great universities and research institutions. So as I conclude, Presiding Officer, I think if we can get this package right around education, if we can continue to deliver world-leading opportunities here, I see no reason why our success as a science nation will not continue for decades and the centuries to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Ian Gray to open for the Labour Party.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government can sometimes be a little too ready to claim world-leading status for Scotland in whatever area of policy endeavour or just life they might be talking about at a given moment. But to claim Scotland as a science nation indeed seems reasonable enough. Certainly, we have the historical track record to point to. The Minister himself mentioned James Watt and Mary Somerville. Mr Mundell went on to talk about some of the others, and there are plenty to choose from. James Clerk Maxwell, Kelvin, Joseph Black, James Black, William Ramsay, Alexander Fleming, Hutton, Napier, Logie Baird. The list goes on and on. That begs the question, of course, how stands our claim today to be a science nation? For after all, there are few countries in the modern developed and indeed developing world who would not claim to be or claim to be trying to be a science nation. After all, it is clear that the future belongs to those countries who can build prosperity on high-tech industries, highly skilled, innovative, and with global relevance and reach, underpinned, therefore, by science. So the Science Advisory Council's assessment of Scotland's science landscape really is a critical and important document. And it does show that Scotland's researchers continue to be amongst the most productive in the world, as the Minister pointed out, measured by publications by researcher, consistently higher than the rest of the UK and indeed all other comparator nations. And it shows that our research continues to be of the highest quality, with the highest average number of citations per researcher. It shows, too, that our research output has increased by 15% since 2007. However, it also tells us that that increase is slower than the United Kingdom generally, and slower than the global average, while our total gross expenditure on research and development as a share of GDP continues to be low, less than the UK as a whole, and indeed less than all comparator nations, with the exception of Ireland. So it is absolutely clear that we cannot rest on our laurels, that we will not maintain our position as a science nation without making the conscious effort to do so. And while the Minister's Science and Research Working Group is a very welcome initiative to pursue such an objective, we do face significant challenges. The most imminent and urgent of those is, of course, Brexit, as the Minister mentioned. And we have separately debated that threat to our science base on a number of occasions. Much of our research is underpinned by EU funding or by the contribution of EU citizens who've chosen to base themselves here. And much of it takes place in research partnerships which are embedded in European research frameworks. All of these are, at best, uncertain now. In this, I have to agree with the Minister, the most effective way of resolving that would be the election on December 12th of a government, a Labour government, willing to put the Brexit question back to the people so that we can stop Brexit. And that would be the way of securing that. Presiding Officer, the motion before us is one that we can all support, I think. Mr Mundell made that point. And I do understand the Minister is seeking consensus. But it would be quite remiss not to at least gently mention that other and greater constitutional threat to our research base, the idea of another independence referendum. Now, we know that Scottish research punches way above its weight in the UK, with 14% of UK-wide research funding won here. And of course, that is won through the excellence of our university and research sector, but we can't assume that we would have continued access to all of that pool of funding were we to leave the UK, and to jeopardise it would simply be foolish in the extreme. Thrown back more on our own resources, whether by Brexit or by independence, would mean redoubling our efforts to ensure the highest quality training and opportunity for our next generations of scientists. And the truth is, Presiding Officer, that in some ways we are already going backwards. That 14% share of UK research funding is a figure from 2019-20 this year, but that was 15.6% only 6 years ago. And Universities Scotland tell us that that drop, small though it sounds, amounts to tens of millions of pounds of research and the jobs which go with it lost to us too. So there are signs there that our competitive edge is slipping when it comes to research. And the reason is not hard to find, I think, because that competitive edge to win funding, whether that's at European or UK level, depends on our core research capacity. And the main research grant for Scotland's universities, the Research Excellence Grant, has been cut by 12% in real terms since 2014-15. In the same period, England's universities have seen their public funding for research and innovation increase. That creates consequential funding, which could have been passed on to universities here in Scotland, but it has not been. Indeed, there are around £18 million of consequentials from university research this year, which the Scottish Government has already received, but has not passed on. Now, it is, of course, the Government's prerogative to spend that money somewhere else, but if we are serious about the desire for Scotland to be a science nation, then we really do have to be prepared to put our money where our mouth is. Universities Scotland have asked for a real terms 2% increase in research excellence funding in the budget, and they really do need a positive response. And of course, the other investment we have to be sure we're making in the future of science, as Mr Mundell spoke about, is in our schools. We have to ensure that the next generation of scientists are being given the knowledge, skills and opportunity to secure our scientific future. So we should be very worried then at the evidence in the committee report and otherwise, which shows that the number of subjects which children can choose in the senior phase of secondary school is reducing, and that STEM subjects are among those which are being squeezed. That's exacerbated by teacher shortages, particularly in computer science, which run the risk of becoming systemic and seeing computer science, for example, squeezed out of many schools altogether. With data science and artificial intelligence, as the Minister himself mentioned, becoming some of the fundamental disciplines underpinning so much research work, so much science, we simply cannot allow that to happen. So, Presiding Officer, of course we will support the Government motion this evening, but we really do need to hear more of the specifics about how the Ministers and Government are serious about supporting Scotland as a science nation into the future.
Thank you very much. And I now call Beatrice Wishart to open for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sorry for that hiccup. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for bringing forward this debate on Scotland as a science nation. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to reinforce the point that it's not only universities and large organisations based in cities that are driving research and innovation, important though that world-leading work is. In Shetland, more than 55,000 fish and shellfish were measured by scientists from the NAFC Marine Centre in 2018. More than 1,700 students enrolled on 150 full-time or part-time courses. That included students from Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, Portugal and Canada studying an online course in fish welfare. 2018 also saw John McCulloch from Unst become the first person in Britain to complete the groundbreaking professional development programme in aquaculture management, developed by the Marine Centre in Scalloway. And Kirsty and Amy Budge are doing important work to share best practice on the farm in Bigton, which is Shetland's monitor farm. So the fishing, aquaculture and agriculture industries are working hard to maintain sustainable world-class products and overcome environmental challenges. And environmental challenges is something that pupils at Sound Primary School told me about yesterday and how important it is to them. Shetland has a history of being at the forefront of scientific breakthroughs. The Chamber may not be familiar with the work of Sir William Watson Sheen, who grew up in Fetlar. During the late 19th century, he was a surgeon and assistant to Sir Joseph Lister, who developed antiseptic surgery, as well as being a researcher at the forefront of medical bacteriology in his own right. But now in the 21st century, Shetland is well placed to capitalise on the burgeoning small satellite industry. I look forward to supporting progress towards delivering a launch facility in Unst. Edinburgh University PhD student Matthias Wiedmar was recently in Lerwick for a talk on Scottish space sports. He made the point that Scotland could be the ideal location to capitalise on space innovation. Already in Scotland, we have the talent to design, build, launch and extract data from satellites. We just need the infrastructure to do it. Part of that is securing high-speed broadband connections. The Education Committee's report into STEM in the early years, published last week, recommended that the government look into the extent to which STEM learning in school is being hampered by poor internet connections. And that is something that can't be allowed to continue if we are to meet our science nation ambitions. And it's not just at school. Children need to be able to access learning materials online at home if they're to develop a passion in STEM subjects. And now that there's a preferred bidder has been announced for the R100 programme, it must proceed quickly. The Education Committee report also looked at gender in early years education. The committee heard that children as young as 6 already associate girls with reading and boys with maths. The latest statistics show that only 17.3% of first-degree entrants on energy and technology courses at Scottish higher education institutions were female. The figure for computer science was similarly low at 18.5%. Equally worrying, the Tapping All Our Talents report from the RSE found that only 30% of female STEM graduates in the UK are working in STEM industries. A science nation cannot have young women being discouraged from pursuing a career in science due to the lack of progress in opening up male-dominated industries. It's government's responsibility to ensure that teachers have the time and resources they need to deliver engaging STEM lessons. That's not happening on a wide scale today, although there is, as others have acknowledged here this afternoon, very good work ongoing. An EIS survey, though, last year found that 90% of teachers don't have enough time to dedicate to professional learning. All that being said, Brexit looms over the Scotland science sector, presenting real risks to funding and collaboration with our EU partners. There are no reassurances about Scotland's status in the successor scheme to Horizon 2020. As of July 2018, Scottish organisations had secured €533 million worth of funding from Horizon 2020. But it's not just about funding. I was saddened to learn last week about Professor Fabio Quanda Matteo's resignation from his post as chair in anatomy at Glasgow University. He wrote on Twitter that it was a difficult and painful decision, mainly driven in planning a long-term life for our Italian family in the UK. The UK will be undeniably poorer if talented academics like Professor Quando Matteo no longer choose to study and make their lives here because they do not feel welcome. The human cost of Brexit is utterly shameful. Scotland didn't achieve any of its past success in isolation, nor will we do so in the future. The Liberal Democrats will be supporting the motion.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn to the open part of the debate and I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Gordon Lyndhurst. Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Early in the week, I was listening to Women's Hour on Radio 4 and they had a really interesting article on women and the Royal Society. And even I, despite someone who is very aware of some of the societal barriers to women in science, was surprised that the first female fellow was only admitted in 1945. And I thank my colleagues in the Chamber who have mentioned the great wealth of talent that we have had in the past in Scotland. And I felt it would be nice to mention some of the women involved in that. So in 2013, I held a debate in here on an exhibition that the National Library of Scotland were doing on women scientists from Scotland. And the women that were chosen to appear in this exhibition, there was a very specific area, was that their work and their research was still being taught in universities and still valid today. So if I run through a few of them, Elizabeth Blackwell, who was a botanist, Elizabeth Fulham, chemist, Wilhelmina Fleming, who's an astronomer who discovered the Horsehead Nebula, Maria Gordon, a geologist who did much of her work in Italy, Muriel Robertson, a zoologist who was one of the first women to be made a Fellow of the Royal Society, Victoria Drummond, a marine engineer, Marion Ross, physicist, who became the first director of Edinburgh University's Fluid Dynamics Unit. And I think it's right that we mention those women because although they don't come to mind as easily as Maxwell and Hutton, their contribution to science and their contribution to Scotland as a science nation has been absolutely invaluable. And I moved from an exhibition that took place on Women's History Month to November, which is also Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month, and hence why I'm sporting a bit of purple today. Pancreatic Cancer Month is about raising awareness of pancreatic cancer, and we know that there will be 10,000 people diagnosed with that disease and that 9,300 of those will die within a very short period from this disease. And that's why I'm delighted that the PanCan van is outside the Parliament today, and they've been highlighting the work that is being done, world-leading work, by the Precision Panc team led from the Wilson Wall Cancer Research Centre at the University of Glasgow. This is a groundbreaking research that is looking at understanding the human genome better. It's about finding the right drug for the right patient at the right time. It is completely patient-focused and is a different way of approaching cancer treatment. It is pancreatic clinical trials are individually focused and genome-based in order to develop targeted treatments for genetically complex pancreatic cancers. This means developing new treatments, optimising current treatments, and matching them to the patient and making them even more effective. It aims to make precision medicine a reality for people with pancreatic cancer, and it's an example of what's happening in modern Scotland that is absolutely groundbreaking and defines us as a science nation. I was very grateful to be taken round the Beatson Centre by Jen Morton and meet the Pancreatic Cancer UK Future Leaders Academies, and the people taking part in that academy who were PhD and MSc students studying pancreatic cancer and looking at preclinical trials of some of the drugs that were being developed there. And it was absolutely remarkable to see these young people in this setting. I have to say that they came from a wide range of backgrounds, and many of them were from other European nations. And this brings me to something, a report that the Minister mentioned from the Scottish Science Advisory Council, and he was very grateful that he highlighted some of the things that Scotland is absolutely excelling on. But I want to talk about two things that are highlighted in that report. The first one is that over 89% of Scottish researchers have published outside Scotland. 57% of Scottish researchers are transitory, and that Scotland is indeed a global collaborator when it comes to science research, working with the USA, Germany, France, Italy and Austria. And what it shows is that as an outward-looking science nation and one who collaborates, that we have to be very, very wary of the dangers of Brexit. I'm very disappointed that the UK Government have yet to respond to the concerns raised by the Education and Skills Committee, particularly around the short stay, temporary leave to stay, which has been extended for 3 years should there be a no-deal Brexit. This is not suitable for Scottish universities. Indeed, Professor Sir Anton Moscatelli described this as crass. He said, we can't have policies which are made on the hoof, which this one appears to be. And I really thank Beatrice Witcher for highlighting the Twitter feed from Quando Matteo and his feelings about being a researcher in Scotland and no longer feeling this was a place where he could raise his family as a direct result of the damage Brexit is already doing to our universities. And this must be addressed, and we must be able to look to a future where Scotland can continue to collaborate, where our students are still able to have exchanges across Europe. And the best way for that to happen simply is for Brexit not to happen. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. We have some time in hand, so I won't be brutal if people want to take an extra minute to make their points. I should have said that yourself, Miss Adamson, but there we are, I didn't. Gordon Lyndhurst, to be followed by Shona Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Scots have invented almost everything worth inventing. At least, I'm sure we might like to believe that. But all joking aside, and of course many true things are said in jest, you name it, the television, the telephone, penicillin, the steam engine, and the bicycle. Refinements of existing technologies or new discoveries by Scots that have enabled immeasurable positive change across the world. And in this modern age, Scotland's scientific success has also become important in finding solutions to our contemporary problems, perhaps most prominently on climate change and emerging technologies of the space race. And importantly, as it has often done, Scottish research impact continues to punch above its weight. We've already heard reference to the Research Excellence Framework, which showed us that 77% of university research in Scotland has been deemed to be world-leading or internationally excellent. Scotland is indeed well placed to take full advantage of new areas of technology and research and to carve out a highly skilled manufacturing and research niche. Consider the newly proposed Aerospace and Innovation Centre, a 10,000 square foot multi-purpose hub for Scotland's aerospace sector, funded through the UK Government's Ayrshire Growth Fund, allowing several constituent parts of our country's nascent aerospace sector to come together and innovate. The involvement of a number of our national universities will hopefully see well-honed routes for our graduates into these sectors in the years to come. Now, the Conservative-led UK Government has made great strides through investment across Scotland. The UK Space Agency has been at the forefront of encouraging innovation, awarding funding to Scots companies like Clyde Space, recognising the £3.8 billion that the commercial space sector could be worth to the British economy over the next decade. The UK's share of the global space industry is projected to grow to 10% in the next 10 years. An essential tenet of this pro-enterprise agenda is, importantly, to remain outward-looking and pro-European. So we will continue to welcome the best talent, allowing close cooperation with our neighbours and the world. The Scottish Conservatives wish, of course, to remain vigilant in defence of a genuinely pro-investment, pro-enterprise agenda in Scotland. We need to avoid anti-competitive policies and underfunded infrastructure. We need to take full advantage of the £521 million of real-term increase in the block grant and generous increases too that recur as a result of Barnett consequentials. In 2016 to 17, of course, the Scottish universities gained 13.5% of their funding via EU allocations. This, however, was far outweighed by the £629.7 million of research gained from UK sources, a sum 6 times larger. Whatever happens in the near future, EU and UK cooperation on such funding will doubtless continue. The current programme is guaranteed by the negotiated financial settlement, and involvement with future Horizon programmes has been left open to discussion. Adam Smith laid the foundations for a free market system for this country, through which scientific innovation flourished, working people gained control over their own lives, and exercised their prerogative in ways previously unthinkable. Arguably, scientific ideas and innovations born here in Scotland have been responsible for lifting millions out of poverty and enabling them to grasp new opportunities that industries have presented. But these things are hard won, and I'm afraid to say that as long as Scotland possesses a government allergic to properly investing in infrastructure and with a counterproductive attitude to investment, we are in danger of losing them. If we take the SNP's mishandling of tax and fiscal policy in Scotland, breaking a manifesto promise not to raise the basic rate of income tax, which now hits everyone earning above £26,000, a salary that can hardly be described as a high income. It is economic common sense that levying uncompetitive tax rates here will only drive business south across the border. And the Scottish Life Sciences Association warned last year that tax rises would only damage recruitment of highly skilled people in Scotland. In closing, however,
busy saying yes to you, Mr.
I will take an intervention,
Lyndhurst.
although I was about to conclude, Deputy
I'm
Presiding
leaping
Officer,
ahead.
I will take the intervention.
That's very kind of you. Minister.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. Will the member at least acknowledge that the biggest threat to researchers and academic staff basing themselves in Scotland, which is cited time and time again, is not the tax regime, it is the threat of Brexit that our university staff and students, the wider research and innovation community all voted against because they want to remain in Europe because that's the best thing to attract people to come and live and work here.
Gordon Lyndhurst.
I thank the Minister for highlighting the point that Brexit brings huge opportunities, not just for the United Kingdom, but for Scotland in particular. And of course, that is something that we should all welcome as we leave the European Union, but remain part of Europe, as we will do. So let me close by saying there always was, and hopefully there always will be, immense talent in Scotland. But that talent must be nurtured and encouraged, not overtaxed and driven away.
Thank you. I call Shona Robison to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Ms Robison, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we have heard, Scotland has long been regarded as a world leader in the field of sciences, being able to boast a number of discoveries that have shaped the modern world. In fact, Dundee is, of course, known as the City of Discovery in honour of its scientific achievements. And, of course, its famous ship, the Discovery, launched in March 1901 and designed for Antarctic research. Discovery's first mission was the expedition that carried Scott and Shackleton on their first successful visit to the Antarctic, known as the Discovery Expedition. An expedition that was one of the first research trips concerned with the environment at a time when little was understood about the nature of our environment or the future importance of its protection. A truly groundbreaking expedition that discovered over 500 new kinds of marine animals, many hundreds of miles of unknown coast, towering mountain ranges and glaciers, invaluable magnetic measurements, auroral observations and seismic recordings. The body of work was massive when the research had been analysed and the Royal Geographical Society came to publish the results. 10 large, weighty volumes were filled. It represented a major contribution to the understanding of the Antarctic continent, a feat made all the more remarkable considering the extreme conditions endured by the heroic scientists of Discovery. And of course, in 1925, Discovery set sail again for the southern seas, the mission to research whale stocks, the migration pattern of whales, and provide a scientific basis for regulation of the whaling industry. As on Discovery's last trip south, important scientific breakthroughs were made and heralded the beginnings of conservation thinking. Scotland, of course, is now a world leader in the fight to protect the environment through our advancements in the scientific understanding of climate change and the application of new scientific methods to combat these threats. A recent report by the Centre for Constitutional Change stated, of course, that Brexit poses significant risks for the climate and energy ambitions of the devolved nations. These include the loss of European structural investment funds targeted at climate and low-carbon energy policies from which the devolved nations have benefited. The removal of EU policy framework, which has incentivised the low-carbon ambitions of the devolved governments directly and indirectly, may also result in lost opportunities fostered by the EU's new legislative framework in climate and energy policy. And I'd be interested to hear the Minister's views on this. And of course, Dundee has been a recipient of a large number of research grants from the EU and has used these to great effect. Dundee punches well above its weight, whether it's with the James Hutton Institute, but particularly in life sciences. The latest win is the £100 million Innovative Medicines Initiative European Lead Factory programme, which will speed up the development of new drugs, won by the BioCity Scotland, Dundee University and the Scottish Universities Life Science Alliance with support of Dutch and English partners. In fact, the University of Dundee has been rated among the world's best universities in terms of the impact of its scientific research in the 2019 CWTS Leiden rankings. They placed Dundee at 15th in the world for the highest proportion of highly cited publications. According to the ranking, Dundee is just behind Oxford at 11 and Cambridge 12 in this important marker of research quality and is the highest placed university in Scotland. Of course, this is not the only way in which the university leads or has led the way, because through her work, Mary Baxter, who at the age of 80 founded University College, the forerunner to the University of Dundee, encouraged a number of women who would otherwise not have had the opportunity to study to take up new careers in science and medicine. And even though this was over a century ago, much still has to be done to ensure that education is equal. And I welcome the Scottish Government's focus on STEM education to develop and grow Scotland's expertise in the interrelated fields of science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And I'd be interested to hear from the Minister as to what further steps the Scottish Government is taking to ensure equal female representation in the take-up of STEM education, and how it ensures they are given every encouragement and opportunity to continue studies in these important fields. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we have a rich scientific history, particularly in the city of Dundee, one of which we should be proud of, but one which needs to be nurtured and supported to ensure it continues to lead the world.
Thank you very much. I call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Gail Ross. Ms Grant, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The sentiments of the motion can't be argued with, a bit like motherhood and apple pie. However, there are challenges in the sector, and there's little acknowledgement of these challenges, either in the motion or in the Cabinet Secretary's opening speech. So let me mention a couple of them. We know that women are underrepresented in the sector, so where is the plan to get more women into STEM? Where is the industrial strategy to ensure that the benefits of our research and development continue into industry and that Scotland reaps the benefit? Looking at the statistics, only 15% of engineering graduates are female. For computer studies, it's 19%, and for maths, it's 38%. Despite these low numbers, the Royal Society of Edinburgh found that 70% of women who graduated with a STEM qualification are not working in the industry, and this is simply not good enough. When we debated artificial intelligence recently, the point was made that things designed for men could be unsafe for women. Caroline Criado-Perez's book Invisible Women points out these dangers. It's about the design of things that we live and work with every day. Frightening statistics like women are 50% more likely to be hurt in a car crash than a man because the car is designed around a male body rather than a female one. The recognised symptoms of a heart attack are of a male heart attack. The symptoms are different in women, meaning that they're more likely to die if they have a heart attack. A world designed by men is simply not safe for women. It's interesting also that robotics often use female voices to take commands, emphasising gender stereotypes rather than creating a fairer world. And it also increases the gender pay gap. These STEM-based jobs are better paid, and women are again being left behind. The gender pay gap is not about women being paid less for doing the same job as a man is. That is illegal. It's about gendered pay. When jobs predominantly done by women are paid less than those predominantly done by men. A nurse, after studying on a bursary for 3 years, starts on a salary of around 22,500. A police officer is paid a salary of around 26,000 from the moment they start training, and by the time they have accrued 3 years on the job training under their belt, they earn around £10,000 more than a nurse who has studied more intensively for the same period of time. They both save lives while putting their own lives on the line. The only reason for this is that police officers are predominantly male and nurses are predominantly female, and that's simply unfair. And that's a gender pay gap. It's historical, and we should not start this unfairness all over again with new career structures. I cannot speak about women in science and technology without mentioning the WISE campaign for gender equality in science, technology and engineering. The University of Edinburgh's Roslin Institute have championed this cause and are working to achieve a better gender balance in STEM. However, they can't do that alone, and we need to ensure that girls at school are choosing science to increase the numbers, going to university and then going into the workplace. And we must also look at why women who make it through university are not working in the field. We know like appoints like, so we need to encourage positive measures to ensure that those appointing are women in order to increase the number of women in those careers. The other issue in this debate I want to touch on, in common with such other debates, is where is the industrial strategy? This is yet another debate about one aspect of our economy held in a silo of its own. This is a government that refuses to step back and see the wider picture, a government without an industrial strategy that hopes that somewhere along the line all these different aspects of our economy will miraculously come together. And that won't happen without them acting and bringing forward an industrial strategy. Its absence means that we're not maximising the impact of actions that are being taken. Resources are short, and we need to ensure that every aspect of development and industry is pulling in the same direction. And that starts with education. We educate children for the world we live in and to equip them for life. And therefore, we need to know what we need them to be and what they need to know to be that. The other issue I want to quickly touch on is research funding, and Ian Gray spoke about this in his speech. The main research grant for Scotland's university is the Research Excellence Grant, and that's been cut by 12% in real terms since 2014-15, and Barnett consequentials have not been passed on. We take our success in research and development for granted at our peril. We used to lead the world on education, and now we're lagging way behind. We cannot afford to do the same with research and development. Presiding Officer, STEM subjects are growing in importance, and we need to ensure that they are promoted throughout school, academia and into the workforce. And to do that, we need a plan to make it happen, and we need to ensure that nobody is left behind.
Thank you very much. I call Gail Ross to be followed by George Adam. Ms Ross, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I refer the Chamber to my register of interest. The Environmental Research Institute, or ERI, is one of the country's leading scientific institutions and authorities on environmental issues. Based in Thurso within the North Highland College UHI, it provides educational opportunities from undergraduate to doctoral level, and its mission is to address contemporary environmental issues and advance understanding of the sustainable use of the Earth's natural resources. Research at the Institute currently focuses on environmental contamination and ecological health, water and climate and renewable energy and the environment. The ERI has built up a reputation in the Highlands and indeed in the wider world, attracting students from the Americas, Asia, Australia and throughout Europe. Its partnership working has seen it access funding for projects with international significance, and its unique setting right beside the largest expanse of blanket bog in the world, the Forsnard Flows, makes it an ideal centre for research on the carbon capture and storage capabilities of the peatlands. One of the current projects is to monitor and assess how much carbon is stored and released at various points around the bog. Peatland scientist Roxanne Anderson uses a special piece of equipment called an eddy flux covariance tower, a complicated name that does a relatively simple job. It samples air from the bog in 30-second intervals to track the amounts of methane and carbon that is stored and released. Now, it's a hardy piece of kit, gathering data day and night, unless it is knocked off course by the wind, and of course Caithness and Sutherland are very windy counties, or its tubes are clogged with midges, so I'm told. Presiding Officer, I have spoken in this chamber recently about the tax incentives to plant trees on the flows and the negative effect that this has had. And when the trees were planted, the ground was dried as the peat was drained, releasing untold amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Scientists have been undertaking restoration of the bog now for 16 years, which includes felling the trees and re-wetting the ground by filling in the furrows. They have seen remarkable results that have further enhanced their understanding of this special environment. And all this contributes to the Scottish Government's climate change plan, which aims to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030. But earlier this year, the peatlands fell victim to a particularly large wildfire that burnt away 6,500 hectares of blanket bog. The area was made up of peatland in a range of conditions: drained and afforested, undergoing restoration and near natural. But Dr. Anderson and her team are using this unprecedented occurrence to their advantage and have secured funding for the Fire Blanket project to try and better understand how the management of the bog influences its reaction to the fire. Presiding Officer, another project, an important project currently underway by ERI scientists, is the research on pharmaceuticals getting into our water courses. And many everyday medicines don't fully metabolise in the body and are routinely excreted and washed into our sewers, which in turn enter our wastewater treatment plants. And some conventional treatment plants, especially those in rural areas, are unable to fully remove them. So for the past year, the scientists have been monitoring levels of pharmaceuticals in the River Dee in Aberdeenshire, and results show that medicines such as ibuprofen, paracetamol, trimethoprim and carbamazepine have been detected. Now, this data will continue to be collected in order to provide evidence-based research for possible policy changes to include maximum levels of pharmaceuticals in environmental quality standards, something which, bizarrely enough, doesn't happen at the moment. In Scotland, we rightly pride ourselves on the quality of our water, and it's of huge importance to our economy. However, there are many challenges, both current and in the future, that have to be resolved if we are to continue to benefit from that. And the UHI's Water Innovation Group, chaired by the ERI's Professor Stuart Gibb, was set up to find solutions to these challenges, particularly in rural and sparsely populated areas, drawing on expertise from around the world. Their last meeting saw collaboration between science, business and other stakeholders interested in water quality, and these parties will continue to work towards the development of new and innovative products that will help to meet policy and regulation changes. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, the ERI is making fantastic scientific progress in many fields, and the work of the people there has never been more essential. So I wish them well in their future endeavours, and to all the students and specialists that come to the area from the EU and around the world, I thank you for your time and work and hope these connections and indeed friendships continue for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call George Adam to follow by Alexander Burnett. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So far, this has been a very good debate. And one of the interesting points that I heard earlier on was when you said there might be an extra minute of time, and Brian Whittle actually celebrated that there might be extra time. After years of running around a track and trying to do it in the least amount of time, now he's celebrating how long it can take. You know, it's oh, how the mighty have fallen. But with regards to this debate in particular, there's a number of very personal reasons and probably selfish reasons why I'm so keen to take part in this debate. But firstly, can I start with what many other colleagues have said as well, that Scotland punches well and truly above its weight in science, research activity and the impact. We could also add that this has always been the case for Scotland. For a start, Scotland's universities have 4 universities in the world top 200 of the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. And this was also recognised in the report published this year by the Scottish Science Advisory Council. The report compares how Scotland's science research sector performed over the past decade against other similar-sized countries. And they found that the Scottish research is of high quality in terms of citations per researcher, and Scotland is #1 compared to other UK nations and the 10 other countries in the report, and that Scottish researchers are very productive, and around 10% of UK researchers are based here in Scotland. And while after listening to Shona Robson's contribution, I thought I couldn't go on when she mentioned Dundee without mentioning what research and our educational places in the great town of Paisley have brought to us. One in particular might not be too popular, actually, the weather.
I have to say, Mr Adam, we had a bet on up here with no money changing hands how long it would take for you to mention Paisley. We were all wrong. You've lasted longer than we thought.
Well, thank you very much. Basically, the weather forecasting was actually, and what was Paisley, the old engineering school, was actually created there in the 1940s and gave the world that. That might not be a positive thing for us with our climate here, but Scotland's excellence in research is underpinned by the extensive collaborations worldwide. And this is an important part of the debate, and one that I'll like to expand on later on, because funding from the Scottish Government has stayed at £285 million from the Scottish Funding Council in 2019-20. And this enables Scottish universities to continue to be very successful in gathering further funding from UKRI, EU, third and private sector sources. This model ensures that we can continue to punch above our weight overall. But for research purposes, we have another advantage. We are a nation of 5 million people. So if you look at research into various long-term conditions and diseases, in pure research terms, we are large enough sample to test just about anything, but small and organised enough to be able to provide quality data. All this brings us to my own very personal, very selfish reasons for wanting to take part in this debate. As many of you know, my wife Stacey has multiple sclerosis, and here in Scotland we have more incidences of MS per head per population than anywhere else in the world. And there are over 100,000 people in the UK living with MS, many of whom are in their 20s or 30s, key working years for us all. 10 to 15% have primary progressive. This is progressive since your very first symptoms. 85% of people with MS are initially diagnosed with relapsing forms of MS. They have distinct attacks of symptoms and underlying damage building up over time, which leads to secondary progressive MS within about 15 years normally. And as far as everyone else is concerned, you'll have seen how Stacey has ended up the way she is with her disability at the moment. She has secondary progressive. Now, currently there are 13 disease-modifying therapies, DMTs, licensed for use here in Scotland, and they slow down damage and reduce relapses. And it was not always like this, presiding officer, because in Stacey's case, she has a level of disability because these DMTs weren't around or available at the time she needed them. But we're not bitter about this because we both can see the opportunity we have through research to make things even better for those living with MS. If you look at the changes in different types of DMTs available now to those with MS compared with 20 years ago, you'll understand why I'm advocating for Scotland's place in science world. Recently, I've had a chance to meet and discuss the future of multiple sclerosis with Professor Siddharthan Chandran of Anne Rowling Clinic and University of Edinburgh. And he was able to show me so much of the work they are currently doing with regards to MS. This will help most neurological conditions as they currently work on MND, MS and dementia. Now, this is where the research gets really interesting. Professor Chandran's research into MS, he sees as a gateway to helping these other conditions. So he sees the MS as a gateway to helping with dementia in the long term as well. And this brings us back to a nation of 5 million people and the fact that we can look towards, and we have more people with MS than anywhere else in the world. We are a nation that's a perfect test subject. We are small enough to be able to manage a project like this, but large enough to make a difference. We have a fully integrated health service and should be able to get anyone we need around the table. And the Anne Rowling Clinic is a perfect example of why Scotland punches above its weight as they're competing throughout the world through University of Edinburgh with the Harvards and the Cambridges of the world. Professor Chandran himself comes from Cambridge. And their funding is a mixed basket for the Anne Rowling Clinic of private, public, and they're recruiting some of the best people in the world. Siddharthan has said to me that he believes we can get a cure for MS and that Scotland can lead the way in this. That's good enough for me, presiding officer. Our wee nation is a big player in the world of science and research. I've given you some of the very personal examples, and that's only in the world of neurology. We can all do this, and science in Scotland will continue to be a giant in the world of research, using our national inquisitiveness and talent, plus the fact that the people from all over the world want to live and work in Scotland. Presiding officer, we must continue to invest in this, whether it be public or private sector, because we can be a centre of excellence in science, and in particularly in the world of neurology.
Thank you very much. I call Alexander Burnett to be followed by Richard Lyle. Mr Burnett, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to be speaking in this debate today, highlighting Scotland as a science nation. And this debate is happening just 2 days after the 160th anniversary of the publication of Charles Darwin's Theory of Evolution. And what relevance of this, you may ask, to Scotland's scientific history? And in answer, I am proud to say that the concept of evolution actually originated nearly 100 years earlier here in Scotland by an ancestor of mine, James Burnet, Lord Monboddo. Now, some scholars consider Monboddo as a percussive thinker in the theory of evolution and credit him with anticipating the idea of natural selection that was read by and acknowledged in the writings of Erasmus Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin subsequently read the works of his grandfather Erasmus and later developed the ideas into a scientific theory. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm not sure if this constitutes a registered interest, but I'm more than happy to declare it if it is. Now, Monboddo, in addition to being the father of Robert Burns' muse Eliza, was an eccentric Scottish judge, as well as a scholar of linguistic evolution and philosopher. And he came from the Age of Enlightenment, which saw Scotland produce a great selection of scientists, discovering in a range of fields, from chemists and physicians, such as Joseph Black, best known for his discoveries of latent heat, specific heat and carbon dioxide, who's been honoured with chemistry buildings both at Glasgow and Edinburgh universities. We also have the fortune of George Forbes, an electrical engineer who experimented in using carbon for the brushes in electrical motors, making it the universal choice in electricity generation to this day, a concept critical to our current decarbonisation programme. And of course, the public today will be glued to our speeches today because of John Logie Baird, who was one of the inventors of mechanical television and was the first person to publicly demonstrate the coloured television system. And Scotland's had a proud history of scientific endeavour, and we're home to a number of UK scientific institutions, with Scotland's universities being world leaders in the scientific community. And we're also fortunate that the future generation still has many budding scientists coming through our schools. On Friday, I was delighted to visit some Bankery Academy students who had taken part in an international 90-mile race at Silverstone in October with their electric car that they had built from scratch. And it's great to see our students in our schools taking part in initiatives that are going to be integral to our future. And that education must flow through to business. Just this morning, I met with a chief executive of ABB, who spends some 1.5 billion on R&D annually, and are the second largest supplier of robots in the world. Their work, from the Robotorium at Heriot Watt to the carbon capture demonstration plant at Imperial College in London, show how business is leading the way, but how it is for governments to set out the path. And science affects all industries. The National Farmers Union of Scotland notes that the agricultural industry is founded upon scientific principles, and for many years advancement of a sector has been driven by world-leading research conducted within Scotland's science and research institutes. Because science in agriculture is vital in helping combat climate change. And with ambitious targets, it is essential that our agricultural industry finds new and innovative ways to reduce their emissions. Now, in my shadow spokesman role for business, energy and innovation, I particularly enjoy getting to engage with companies across Scotland in ways they are finding to create new solutions. One such organisation are the Data Lab Innovation Centres that work in Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Inverness and Glasgow. And whilst data science is maybe not as well known as a field, work in this area will soon become commonplace in businesses across Scotland and the UK, and is expected to contribute over £20 billion to Scotland's economy by the end of next year. And I'm pleased that being part of the UK has such a positive impact on our life sciences, because it's encouraging to read that the UK life sciences sector is soaring, with a record turnover of over 70 billion. And SMEs now account for 82% of businesses and 24% of all UK life sciences employment. And in 2018, we saw the UK government publish part 2 of its life sciences sector deals, which will help ensure new pioneering treatments and medical technologies are produced in the UK, highlighting the progress made, as well as the new commitments from our UK government and the wider industry. However, due to the SNP's obsession with independence, we have seen important subject issues, such as progress in STEM subjects, hindered up here in Scotland. And the proof is in the figures, as the number of employers flagging STEM skills shortages has increased. In 2015, the Scottish Government's own annual report on STEM found that the proportion of STEM employers in Scotland with at least one skills shortage vacancy was 6.4%. And in 2017, that had risen to 7.7%. This is simply not acceptable. We can and must do better. We are a country with a proud heritage of scientific thought. But this SNP government is dimming the lights in a country once known for its enlightenment. Thank you.
And the last of the open debate contributions is from Richard Lyle.
You know, Presiding Officer, I think I'll try not to mention politics. I'll try not to mention Brexit. I'll try not to mention that word that the Tories are concentrating on, because they haven't got one single policy. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate this afternoon. Presiding Officer, Scotland's contribution to the world is renowned. From mammal cloning to the television, to penicillin, to the telephone and many, many, many more inventions. Scotland is a science and research nation, and we already punch above our weight and enjoy a global reputation for our research and innovation. This reputation continues into the modern world, with research and developments in abundance. Scotland more than punches, as I say, above its weight in science, research activity and impact. Indeed, in 2016-17, Scottish universities secured £282 million, 9.2 of a £3 billion of UK Research Council spending on grants, studentships and fellowships. With Scottish universities having so far secured almost €650 million of funding from the EU Horizon 2020 programme, representing around 11% share of the UK's share of funding as of July 2019. Scotland's share of the world's top 1% most cited publications in the world over 2007 to 2016 is the largest of all UK nations, and Scotland has 4 universities in the world top 200 of the Times Higher Education THE World University Rankings 2019-20. This is more per head of population than any other country except Switzerland. And, Presiding Officer, 3 of these universities are in the world top 200 for research, volume, income and reputation, and 4 for research influence, citations. 9 Scottish universities are in the world top 200 for international outlook, staff, students, research. This was also recognised in a report published this year by the Scottish Science Advisory Council. Now, that was a lot of numbers, Presiding Officer. I can make a joke about that, being the nature of a science and research geek on the theme, but I'll leave it at that for another time. Because these numbers and these facts tell a story about Scotland, and it's a good story about Scotland and our institutions. It describes the type of outward-looking nation that we are, with an immense contribution being made. This SNP government recognises that, and I am sure it will continue to invest in core research and knowledge exchange in Scottish universities, allowing them to compete successfully for other funding. The baseline grant for university research and innovation from Scottish Government via the Scottish Funding Council, SFC, for 2019-20 stayed at £285 million to continue to strengthen this status. What that means in practice is an enablement of Scottish universities to continue to be very successful in competing for funding from other sources, receiving almost 75% of their research and innovation income from UKRI, EU, third sector and private sector sources. The SFC core grant for research and innovation includes the University Innovation Fund, £13.5 million in 2019-20, which has an explicit objective of supporting the Scottish Government's economic strategy, in particular the innovation pillar, via effective translation of research excellence in economic and societal benefit for Scotland. Reiterating our commitment to seeing our world-class research and development and innovation being used to shape a better Scotland, and hopefully an independent Scotland. Oh, sorry, I meant not to use that word. The Scottish Government continues to fund a network of innovation centres in Scotland. SG, SFC and enterprise agencies have committed up to £75 million for Phase 2 over the next 5 years, 2019-2024, ensuring that there are world-leading collaborations between business, universities, college, public sector and others to capitalise on Scotland's world-class research. And we're not just looking here in Scotland. Indeed, excellence in research is underpinned by extensive collaborations worldwide. Scotland can point to significant successes in working across European boundaries with international research centres that are increasingly attracted to Scotland by the quality of our research base. Scotland has long excelled in science and research, and therefore it's only right that it should be celebrated as a science nation, not just in this chamber today, but every day. At the beginning of my speech, I reflected on the notable contributions from Scots in research and science in the near past. But we have to be more modern. We have even more modern invention. Now, admittedly, I'm not much of a gamer, but I know that Grand Theft Auto has become a cult classic and is the brainchild of Scottish video game design extraordinaire David Jones and Mike Daly. But the question is, how do we continue to shape and create that innovation and science nation? STEM is an integral part of our future economic and social development. We want everyone in Scotland to build a strong base of STEM skills and knowledge. That is a part of the answer. That's why STEM education is a priority of this SNP government. The Scottish Government published its STEM education and training strategy in 2017. It aims to build Scotland's capacity to deliver excellent STEM learning and close equality gaps in participation and attainment in STEM, aiming to inspire young people and adults to study STEM, to provide a better connection between STEM education and training and the needs of the labour market in Scotland. And we rightly have to focus on encouraging young women to enter and see STEM as part of their future, creating the next generation of scientists and innovators. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I'm taking you at word, I'll take a wee bit extra time. Scotland's world-class research plays a key role, I'm enjoying this, in economic and societal and environmental challenges, both nationally and globally, because it's getting back at our friends across there who have said nothing in regards to the excellent speech I'm making. It supports inclusive, sustainable economic growth, delivering high-skilled people to the labour market, creating new business, improving the performance of existing public and private organisations, attracting foreign direct investment through a creation and application of new knowledge. Researchers in Scotland are at the forefront of multidisciplinary international research collaboration, tackling national and global challenges, driving forward the frontiers of knowledge, and I am proud that we have had the chance today to recognise Scotland's role as a science nation, and long may it continue. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
We'll move now to the closing speeches, and I call Ian Gray for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As I think the Minister predicted, we've heard lots of examples today of Scotland's pedigree as a science nation, with lots of examples of great scientists from the past. Alistair Burnett probably won the prize there by claiming that a member of his family developed the idea of natural selection 100 years before Darwin, and I do feel compelled to point out to him that there is another Scottish connection with that particular science, which is that Darwin himself first developed his own ideas of evolution and natural selection while strolling the beach in Prestonpans in East Lothian while he was a student at the University of Edinburgh. All great things come not just from Scotland but from East Lothian, in fact. But we have also, I think, quite rightly heard more about what we have to do in order to sustain Scotland as a science nation into the future. And I just want to comment on some of those. I won't have time, obviously, to talk about all of them. I thought George Adam made quite an important point, because one of the things that we have to do is to make the most of Scotland, not just as a science nation, but as a research nation, because of our size and of medical research, and Mr. Adam made that point, and that is something that I think we could make more of. A number of speakers, including myself, talked about the importance of bringing through future scientists in our schools, and the core issue here is absolutely around subject choice in our schools, and the overwhelming evidence that science and maths subjects are being squeezed in our curriculum at the moment. Now, the Scottish Government have undertaken a review of the senior phase in our schools, and I simply say to the Minister that as the Science Minister, he must make absolutely sure that protecting access to science subjects is a key part of that review. Beatrice Wisher and Rhoda Grant talked about a particular aspect of that, which is the thing that I think, again, is well understood and well evidenced as a challenge, the barriers to young girls and young women choosing science subjects and going on to choose a career in science. And the key piece of evidence here is the one that Beatrice Wisher referred to, Tapping All Our Talents, the Royal Society of Edinburgh report in 2012, and their progress report on that, which was published last year. And although that progress report did show some progress, it also showed that even in sciences where there was a reasonable gender balance, when we look at, so biological sciences, for example, when we look at senior positions in those sciences, again, there is a predominance of men, and that leads to exactly the gender pay gap, which Rhoda Grant was talking about, where the senior, better paid positions are still, it would appear, disproportionately reserved for men. Now, that report gives a significant series of recommendations of how to address this. Somebody, I think it was Rhoda Grant, talked about, the Rosalind Institute and the WISE programme there. Rosalind Institute is a good example to look at in addressing this issue because they also are, I think, the only research institution in Scotland with a gold award in the Athena Swan programme. And one of the ways in which Athena Swan has been progressed is by funding bodies insisting on institutions having that programme in place before they will fund. So I say to the Scottish Government, when we look at the SFC and how they make their funding, perhaps there's something there that they could perhaps think about. There's a quote from Albert Einstein where he says, most people say that it is the intellect which makes a great scientist. They are wrong, it is character. And I think that's true of a science nation as well. And the Minister himself kind of referred to this when he talked about the importance of respecting the experts, respecting science, and the ethics of science. And I think that is absolutely right. But Mr Mundell made an important point as well when he said, if you do that, you cannot cherry-pick which experts you decide to respect and which you don't. And, you know, I say gently, the Scottish Government has not always respected the experts' opinion, for example, in the role that nuclear power can play in decarbonising our electricity supply, or indeed in the role in research of genetic modification. In both these instances, the experts have not really been listened to, and surely.
Richard Lochhead.
It's an interesting point the member makes, but surely he's not suggesting that scientists should simply make policy, that's why we have elected politicians to apply ethics and different criteria to deciding what's the best policies to implement. But they should be informed by good science. Therefore, it's not a case of disrespecting science and genetic modification or nuclear power to take a policy position that they're not the best options for Scotland.
Ian Gray.
Well, of course that's true. One of the ways in which policymakers do that is through the scientific advisors. And we have a very good chief scientific advisor. I think you mentioned him yourself, Minister, and Sheila Rowan. But again, that's another example of where the Scottish Government hasn't always been to the fore in this, because Professor Rowan was appointed after a very long interregnum when we had no chief scientific advisor for, I think, 18 months, almost 2 years. And so that sense of urgency that we need to see hasn't always been there. But there's lots of good things that people have talked about. The innovation centres, another one which it would have been good to discuss, I think, would be the research pooling, of which the Scottish Universities Physics Alliance, which Professor Rowan was part of, has been a very good example. But all of those in the end come down to this. If we want Scotland to be a science nation, we do in the end have to put our money where our mouth is. So let's return to some of these issues when we get to debating the budget, and let's see the investment that our universities tell us they need in order to ensure our future as that science nation.
Now call Brian Whittle for around 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by just referring members to my register of interest? Deputy Presiding Officer, can I just start by talking about George Adams' preamble into his speech and my excitement of perhaps getting an extra minute to talk about science, and then he goes on to take it 2 minutes extra in his own speech as well to make sure that I can't have that. And I think one of the big, as already been mentioned, one of the big revelations, of course, is that we find out that Darwin was 100 years too late in his theory of evolution, because Alexander Burnett's family had sorted that out a long time before that. I do welcome the opportunity to speak in today's debate. It's not all that long ago we debated innovation in the Chamber, and just last week Ian Gray led a fascinating members' debate on the International Year of the Periodic Table. And what a fantastic debate that was. The Deputy Presiding Officer was literally positively purring with excitement as we discussed that topic. But and it was missed by so many MSPs. But the good news, of course, is that you can go back and watch it on parliamentary TV, because I know you won't. Now, Scotland is unquestionably a science nation, whether at home or around the world. Scottish scientists have pioneered many breakthrough discoveries, as we've heard today, that have changed our world over the centuries. Scots and Scotland have often led the way with innovations and discoveries that have become ubiquitous in the modern world. And I listened with interest to Richard Lockhart's opening speech, and he did mention the B word, the Brexit, and its threat to collaboration in the science world. And collaboration is hugely important to the advancement of science, and we need to encourage that collaboration, and as can be seen, for example, within space exploration and that sort of global approach to that. But I'd also note so many of the world's leading science achievements, although rooted in Scotland, were long before the European Union was ever thought of, and were also were within that union. And science has led the way in seeking out excellence and collaboration beyond country boundaries for a long time, and I'm sure that will continue to be the case. The other thing I took out of Richard Lockhart's speech was Scotland is fantastic. He's quite right at innovation and invention. However, I think it's the step after that where we need to do better, that implementation of the technology and creating that environment for technology to grow into businesses of size in Scotland. And to that point, I think Shona Robson was quite right to highlight Dundee as an exemplary tech hub for things like life sciences, and who knew gaming, and who knew that Richard Lyle was an expert in the field of Grand Theft Auto. But there we learn something every day, Deputy Presiding Officer. But I think that what we have to be careful of here is we are very good at developing that initial SME type business, but not quite so good at developing that into the bigger business. And I think there's too many of our innovative companies are purchased by the US or China and then developed further afield. Even if we talk about the countryside of Scotland has contributed to science. In 1774, Schiehallion in Perthshire was chosen as an ideal location for an experiment by a team of scientists seeking to determine the mean density of the Earth. And at the time, the Astronomer Royal, Neville Maskelyne, who conducted the experiment, suggested they would do honour to the nation where it was made. But is the motion a bit complacent? There is obviously no small amount of back-patting in the motion, albeit very well deserved. But far less is said, I think, about the future of the Scottish science beyond the conclusions of the Science and Research Working Group. At its core, science is about questions and answers. Often when we find answers, they provoke new questions. It is an endless process of discovery. Sometimes we find a new answer, sometimes a new question. But there is never an end to what science can teach us or do for us. So we have to keep pushing the boundaries of science, keep exploring, keep discovering. Scotland does have that enviable world-class reputation, but the competition for scientific discovery is only ever going to become more fierce, and we have to be ready. Slightly concerning for me, I think, Deputy Presiding Officer, in the last line was about promoting Scotland's strengths. And we should be wary of narrowing our scientific focus to the point that we give us less support to any kind of research which isn't judged to be one of Scotland's strengths. Yes, we have real strengths in arenas like life sciences and aerospace and astronomy, but there's an important balance between focusing on specialist areas and ensuring that we can still benefit from cross-pollination and collaboration between different scientific fields. We don't always know which projects or ideas will prove to be the right ones, or whether they'll end up being a catalyst for something even more important. Some of our greatest scientific breakthroughs have been by accident, or their true value was only discovered much later. Scotland's own Alexander Fleming, born in Darvel in East Ayrshire, discovered penicillin entirely by accident. The electron was discovered in 1897, and at the time it was an interesting fact about the structure of the universe, but it had no practical application. Today, our entire world runs on electronics. Scotland is a science nation, but science is a global endeavour. Our scientists working around the world, we have scientists of other nationalities working here. Science is a global language, even a universal language, as we discussed it at length in Ian Gray's debate last week. Science and scientific discovery is a race. We cooperate around the world, but being the nation at the forefront of science or the first to discovery gives you a competitive advantage. I think we kind of had touched on the value of science in policy making. As Adam Smith said, science is a great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. Many of the challenges facing Scotland today will require scientific solutions, or at the very least, policy making supported by scientific evidence and discovery. At the forefront of that, of course, as has become very prevalent these days, is climate change and renewables, things like hydrogen cell fuel technology, electric car charging, carbon capture has been talked about today, improved recycling, battery technology, and new sources for energy. And it is the youth of today, actually, that are leading that debate and making us pay attention to that. The science and healthcare technology is something that I'm very interested in, and we are particularly good at that, of developing healthcare technology in Scotland. Dundee has been mentioned as one of them, but what we're not good at is uptaking that technology and adopting it into our healthcare system. Nye Bevan spoke about the principles underlining the NHS. He talked about the medical arts of science and healing. So when we're looking at healthcare technology and gene therapy and stem cell research and nanotechnology, I think we also have to look at how we are going to adopt that technology at the other end. I think Oliver Mundell, in his speech, quite rightly highlighted the need for science in education, teaching which inspires, which experiments in the classroom and that relevance to the real world. We need to be fostering a passion for science and that scientific method, but also allowing pupils to be creative and try left-field ideas just to see what happens. We need to be inspiring pupils to take on great science and engineering challenges facing us, from fighting cancer to new battery technologies and energy sources, to improved food production. And again, as it was highlighted by Oliver Mundell, we have to look at the curriculum for excellence and that squeeze currently on STEM subjects, and that need to ensure STEM subjects are accessible for all. If not, the outcome, as Alexander Burnett said, there's too many tech companies out there reporting a shortage of staff in STEM subjects. So I would love to say, Deputy Presiding Officer, but what I will say is we do need to continue to be ambitious in our support for science as we ask science to be in its quest for new discoveries. As Arthur C. Clarke said, the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. So let's continue to strive for the limits of possibility, pushing the edge of what is possible further into the distance, and continue to ensure that Scotland's scientific community continue to make history. Deputy Presiding Officer.
I now call Richard Lochhead to wind up the debate for around 11 minutes. Please, Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to all the members for their contribution in this debate, where we've been celebrating Scotland's scientific heritage and the fact that even today, and there will be for a long, long time, continuing excellence in our country. I know many members mentioned scientific endeavours in their own corners of Scotland, every part of the country, and George Adam even managed to mention Paisley, of course, within his first sentence, and I thought he was giving us the impression that Paisley invented the weather, and I was going to say, of course, didn't make a very good job of that, but, of course, then he went on to talk about other issues close to his heart, particularly science in relation to finding treatments for MS, and he spoke about the advances that have taken place in treatment and the ongoing work at the Anne Rowling Centre at the University of Edinburgh. And he explained how Scotland in that particular area is punching above its weight at the moment as well. And other members mentioned working on in their own constituencies. Shona Robinson mentioned the amazing work going on at the University of Dundee. I particularly pay tribute to the work over the early diagnosis of cancer that's taking place at that particular university. And also, of course, with the James Hutton Institute in the Dundee area as well, and vertical farming to address food security issues and low-carbon food production and other matters as well. And Gail Ross mentioned in that corner of our nation, in terms of Thurso, the University of Highlands and Islands, at the Environmental Research Institute, the work that's going on there in terms of carbon capture and storage. So all the examples that were mentioned by members are little points of light of scientific discovery and endeavour taking place in every corner of our nation that we should be proud of. And it really does, as George Adams said, show that Scotland is punching above our weight, because we only are a nation of 5 million people in this world of 7 billion people or thereabouts, and that is an incredible legacy that we do have in this country. And it's not just the past, it's, as many people said, it's the day as well. There were various references to women in science, and I want to talk about that briefly. I mentioned Mary Somerville in my opening remarks. Claire Adamson mentioned many other female scientists that claims to fame. And, of course, I should also mention the Scottish Government's Chief Scientific Advisor is Professor Sheila Rowan, who is Professor of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Glasgow, and, of course, is internationally renowned for her achievements and work in the context of gravitational waves. I would also recommend that anyone who wants to visit the Royal Society of Edinburgh will see the Women in Science exhibition that's taking place there, highlighting many of our most famous female scientists, including many of today's scientists. And I should also point out that the President of the Royal Society of Edinburgh is, of course, Dame Anne Glover, who is also a well-known scientist in her own right as well. And then a debate over women in science went on to how we ensure there's women in science in the future, and more women getting involved in science today, and more females getting involved at school, in college and university. And it is important to address that, because that is a big challenge, as many members said. I should say, of course, that following a successful 3-year research project, that Education Scotland has now appointed improving gender balance and equalities officers that will work throughout Scotland, and their role will be to address gender imbalance and attainment at every stage, from ages 3 to 18 as well. And each college and university now has a gender action plan outlining how they will advance equality and reduce gender disparities within STEM and other areas of further and higher education as well. There's also a lot of work taking place in early years, where much of the stereotyping has to be addressed and the perceptions addressed, and a lot of the evidence says we have to intervene early with young girls at early years education as well. However, the University of Scotland briefing does say that the number of people graduating with STEM degrees increased by 9% over the last 2 years. So the situation is improving, even though there's a long way to go. And of course, the Scottish Government has introduced STEM bursaries of up to £20,000 for career changers. They're oversubscribed and are proven to be a popular measure to encourage people to change career and come into teaching jobs in STEM subjects as well. Other issues that were mentioned include research funding. I think it's important to put in the record that the Scottish Government is continuing to invest £285 million into core university research funding. Also that the...
Brian Whittle.
I thank the member for taking an intervention. And when we're mentioning funding, would you also recognise the importance of the third sector and the amount of funding they put into research, especially around developing new healthcare technologies?
Minister.
Absolutely, the third sector and the charitable sector are investing literally hundreds of millions of pounds into research projects in Scotland, and that should be recognised as well. In terms of Barnett consequentials, the comment was made that the Scottish Government doesn't pass on the Barnett consequentials from UK research. That's not true. In 2018-19, we passed on the £11.6 million of budget consequentials for university research. And also, we should also note that the university sector in higher education attracts £800 million per year of research funds from other sources. And although the share of UKRI funding has gone back slightly, as referred to by some members, the actual figure has increased because, of course, there's now more funding being hosted by the UKRI as well. It was mentioned, of course, that Scotland's constitutional arrangements are very relevant to the amount of research funding coming into Scotland. On the one hand, research funding, of course, knows no boundaries because it's the scientific excellence that attracts the research funding. It's not borders between countries. It's the scientific excellence. And that's why Scotland has been so successful at attracting scientific funds from many different sources and many different sectors. But, of course, if you withdraw from international arrangements, that can be damaging. So the threat is not the independence debate, as some members mentioned. The threat, the immediate threat that's on the lips of every researcher in Scotland as we speak, is the threat of Brexit. It's the fact that Scotland has secured almost €650 million of funding from the EU Horizon 2020 programme over the past few years. And if we leave Europe, if we have Brexit, that's the money that will be endangered. That's the constitutional change that will endanger research funding coming to Scotland, and that's something we should all bear in mind. The reason why I have created the Science and Research Working Group chaired by the Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Sheila Rowing, is because we want to bring together all the stakeholders in academia to celebrate Scottish science, work on how we can make it work even better for Scotland, more collaboration, more of an international profile, make sure the rest of the world knows that this country is the science nation, and that will attract more research funds and inward investment at the same time. And the work we're carrying out did lead to the first ever Science and Research Summit, which I mentioned previously, which was held in June. It had 3 key themes: improving science and research collaboration across Scotland, driving science and research excellence in Scotland, and promoting and marketing of Scotland's science and research internationally. Because we have an amazing story to tell, but I do feel that we're not telling it often enough or loud enough. So we should tell it to our own people, to inspire them to take up scientific careers and get involved in research and innovation, and we should tell it to the rest of the world, because we do have a great reputation around the world, that we should make more of it, and we should sell Scotland's story, and as I said before, attract more research funding, more collaboration and more inward investment to our country as well at the same time. And the economic contribution of our science and research is paramount. It's worth highlighting the Scottish Government's Export Growth Plan that was launched earlier this year, made the link between trade and excellence in science and research and innovation. And as many people will be aware, we've also, through Derek Mackay, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, we commissioned Professor Anton Muscatelli of Glasgow University, who's of course an eminent economist, to review the economic impact universities in Scotland make through working with business as well. So we do feel that that again has to be highlighted as we move forward. But in my last minute or two, I just want to say that during these uncertain times, it's also more important than ever before that our graduates, especially those from other countries, turn their positive experiences here in Scotland into influence and support for Scotland as well. It's really, really important that we want to remain one of the world's leading science and innovation nations, that we are seen to be an outward-looking, tolerant country, open to Europe and the rest of the world. And that's why we will have to strain every sinew to make sure that we are seen as a welcoming country. If Brexit goes ahead, that's going to set us back, because we will not end up in a place that's better or the same as where we're starting from at the moment. That's the message from every university, every research institution, every researcher and every research fund as well. That's going to be our biggest challenge, to ensure we can maintain a reputation as a science nation in the years ahead. But we will have to respond to whatever happens. We'll have to ensure that every graduate and every researcher that comes here for a while and then goes back to their home country is an ambassador for Scotland, remains a friend of Scotland, and that's why we're also pursuing a new strategy for alumni around the world as well, which will deliver huge dividends for this country. But I thank members for all their contributions in celebrating Scotland as one of the world's leading science nations. We should build on that, deliver the social, economic contribution back to our country that brings, and also make sure that our science, our intellectual capital, our knowledge contributes to solving the world's problems at the same time. Be that overpopulation, be that food security, be that tackling climate change, where we can lead the world as well. That's what the future should hold for our country. That will mean jobs, that will mean success, and it will mean a better Scotland at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our debate on Scotland as a science nation. And if no member objects, I would be minded to accept a motion without notice to bring forward decision time till now. No one does. Minister, could I call on you to move such a motion?
It moves, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. So the question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. So there's only the one question today. The question is that motion 20027 in the name of Richard Lockhead on Scotland as a science nation be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business in the name of Elaine Smith on the positive contribution of Catholic schools. We'll just have a short pause while members and ministers change seats. A short pause.